Hello. This is going to be a fairly short PowerPoint and presentation from me because I primarily want you all to watch a video, which is fairly long. It's a little bit over an hour, but I think it's very good in that you'll get a much better picture of quality and patient safety in healthcare organizations than I can provide to you. It's quality and patient safety is a different level of expertise than most healthcare lawyers have. And so I want you to get the expertise from the quality and patient safety people, which are generally healthcare providers that are working directly in either a quality department or patient safety, or that's their organization that they work for. And it's generally going to be doctors or nurses that's their primary focus, is quality and patient safety. And the film is called To Err is Human. It's a documentary, and we will give you information on how to access that film. You can rent it for like $2.99 from various different places, YouTube, Amazon, and so forth. So with that, I will go ahead and give you at least some information to think about as you watch the video. So because there is still a recognition that there are many errors and harm occurring in healthcare organizations across the country, there's been a shift of focus to patient harm and not just to our traditional ways of promoting quality, such as licensure and peer review internally in facilities, competencies and things like that, but a recognition that there's more to patient harm than just making sure that individuals are properly licensed and meet minimum standards and so forth. This focus changed beginning in really the early 1990s with the Harvard Medical Practice Study. And then in 1999, the Institute of Medicine came out with its report, To Err is Human. And then building on that is the documentary that you will watch as part of this week's assignment. But based on these and other studies, and there's been a lot of criticisms on these studies that their definitions weren't standardized, that their methodology may have led to some conclusions that really were incorrect and so forth. But despite the criticisms, there is still a basic agreement that yes, there is a lot of medical error, and that probably somewhere between 200,000 and almost 450,000 people die every year from preventable errors in hospitals or healthcare organizations. So to improve on the quality of care and the patient safety, hospitals and other healthcare organizations have moved to various ways to try to understand better and manage the errors and the patient safety issues that are occurring in their facilities. One of those is adverse event tracking or incident reporting systems. And at least most large hospitals now will have an online event tracking system. All the employees of the facility, not just healthcare providers, but all employees will receive education on what to report, how to report, when to report, what information to fill out, and so forth. Those systems are generally set up under a peer review privilege if it's available in the state, and remember those are state-by-state privileges, because that information you are going to encourage reporting by people thinking that information will be used in a peer review quality protected type setting, so that the information can be used to improve care, to change practices that may not be safe and so forth, and that there's a chilling factor if those things are reported and people get in trouble for it and so forth. So generally they're going to be set up under some peer review protections if that's available. There's quality improvement, patient safety programs and initiatives that hospitals are doing, things like safety bundles. If you have a procedure such as a central line, or a patient has a central line, then there will be what's called maybe a bundle, which is a grouping of steps. There will be studies shown that if you follow these 10 steps, then that is the safest way to care for a central line. And so those steps will be organized in what hospitals may call a bundle, and then everybody that's dealing with that patient's central line will follow those bundle safety steps. So that's one thing. Hand washing programs, and there may be safety cards so that there are, secret shoppers, so to speak, looking to see who is, actually washing their hands. Are they doing it correctly? Are they doing it as often as they need to? Are there sinks inside the room so that you don't touch door handles and other things that are not clean before you touch the patients, but that you go through those dirty places like a door handle, you get into the patient's room, and you then wash your hands right there at the bedside before you touch the patient. So looking at those types of things, and there's various programs and incentives, incentives meaning, you're the, safety employee of the month and things like that hospitals and healthcare organizations have instituted. And then a trend towards what, is sometimes called system reengineering, but it's really looking at things from a systems approach and how do we make the system safer? Because there has been a recognition that to err is human and that people will make mistakes. So there's definitely a need to make sure that doctors, nurses, any healthcare providers are competent and meeting the, reasonable standards of care that are the ordinary standards of care for that particular profession. But then in addition, that people are going to make mistakes. Even if you are a competent practitioner, you're going to make a mistake at some point in time. So looking at things that the system can do to help mitigate or eliminate those mistakes. Medication errors are a good place to look for what facilities have done there, because medications are complicated. There are thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of medications in our pharmacy systems. And there's different dosing for different patients, different routes, different times. You have to get so many things right to write a medication order, to get that order properly filled, and then to safely administer that to the patient. So there's safeguards all along the way. So let's say, for example, a physician writes in the electronic medical record system an incorrect dose for a patient of a particular medication. Well, the electronic medical record system may be the first place that there is a safeguard, and an alert may come up that says this dose is out of range. Well, the physician can override that alert. Maybe they do that wrongly. They're thinking, no, I need a higher dose for this particular patient for, a valid reason. So they override the alert. There's also something called alert fatigue, but so too many alerts coming up on EMRs, people tend to ignore them and, may override the alert. But let's say the physician, it's not alert fatigue. They override the alert on purpose, thinking that they are right, but they are still wrong. They're still making an error. So then that order goes to the pharmacy, and the pharmacy is going to get a similar alert, and they check with the physician. The physician says, no, that's what I need. So the pharmacist doesn't take the time to question that again and say, well, wait a minute, this is outside the safety range. We need to understand why you need this amount of drug. So the pharmacy even maybe takes the effort to call the provider and figure it out. They go ahead and fill the prescription. They send it. The nurse gets an alert, or the nurse is aware that this is outside the normal dosage. And so the nurse administers it to the patient. Well, that's what, and you'll see this in the video or the documentary that you're going to see on The Error is Human, but that's what they sometimes call the Swiss cheese effect. So the initial error is made by the practitioner, the physician, or whoever's ordering the medication. And then it goes through all these safety nets, and generally one of those safety nets is going to catch the error. But if all the safety nets fail, then the error still reaches the patient, and the patient has a medication error, an overdose, an underdose, whatever it might be. So there's these safety nets built in. So that's one example of you're looking at giving medication as a system function, and how can the system do better? Now, you do have to, just I guess a word of warning here, you have to be careful that the system doesn't sort of take over. And there's a trend to do that. And rather than blame, quote, blame, and that's a bad word, but rather than sort of placing the responsibility or accountability, if you will, on an individual person, i.e. it started with the practitioner, with the physician who wrote the order wrong and even reassured the pharmacy that this is what I want, then rather than holding that person accountable, it's easier to make it and quote, blame the system and say, oh, it's a system problem because the system broke down in letting that medication error actually reach the patient. So you have to guard against like individual accountability being watered down and too much responsibility being put on the safeguards, and have a balancing system where individual accountability and the balancing and the safeguards balance each other, and you are dependent on both of those for the proper care and safe care getting to the patient. So hope that makes sense. So when we look at quality and patient safety, we got to understand what we're talking about first. Quality is way harder, at least in my opinion, than patient safety. I pulled up all these definitions that I just randomly found, on the internet, but you can look at the screen and see, it's defined in different ways by different agencies and organizations or different healthcare facilities. And the definitions are sometimes the same, but they're a little bit different. So there's various interpretations of what quality can mean or does mean in a particular organization. So quality in healthcare, it's hard to arrive at a consensus as to what constitutes good quality care. And the definitions don't always line up, and there's some inherent problems in those definitions. There is general agreement that there are sort of 6 dimensions of healthcare quality. And those are that healthcare should be safe, you avoid injuries to patients from the care that's intended to help. And that more goes along with the patient safety aspect, which is pulled out, and there's a different definition for patient safety, which we'll see in a minute. That care is provided timely, you reduce wait times, delays in care, that the care is effective, that providing the appropriate level of services based on scientific knowledge is going to have the desired intent or effect that you want to have for the patient, that it's efficient, it avoids waste in supplies, equipment, and in provider time and energy, that it's equitable, that it doesn't vary based on individual characteristics, and that it's patient-centered, that you provide care that's respectful of and responsive to individual patients. And that's why it's important that for example, the physician be able to say, I understand this is a dose that is inconsistent with what our electronic records say it should be. The pharmacy calling the physician could still override that and say, for this individual patient, I want this particular dose. So it could turn out you're going to rely on the physician who is ultimately responsible for their orders for that patient, but there should be a lot of safeguards. If all those safeguards check back in with the physician, then, most of the time, unless it's something really out of line, then that physician is going to be able to do that so that they're not bound by cookbook medicine, so to speak. But hopefully the physician is, compliant with and agreeable to people questioning them, and that they then look at their own, do I really want this amount? Again, that's sort of just by way of example there. So patient safety is kind of pulled out from one of those 6 quality indicators, and it really is defined as how hospitals and other organizations protect their patients from errors, injuries, accidents, infections, any type of harm that could occur to the patient in the hospital or the healthcare facility setting. So in looking at what do we do to improve patient safety, there's generally a focus around communication. That communication has to not only be effective, but we've got to have tools for communicating so that we all understand, whether it's the use of abbreviations and everyone understands what that abbreviation means, that there's certain information that if I say, the sky is blue to you, that I'm talking about right now at noon on Wednesday, the sky is blue. But if you are looking at this video at 10 p.m. on Wednesday, well, the sky's not blue. So we have to make sure that my communication is the sky is blue at noon on Wednesday, I think today's the 6th, so that when you're looking outside at 10 p.m., you're like, oh, at noon on May the 6th, And, you know, in Fort Worth, Texas, the sky was blue. But when you're looking at it at 10 p.m., it's not, and there's no miscommunication there about what I meant. So you have to be very specific with communication and communicate in language. And I don't mean different. I mean, obviously, speaking the same language is important, but really communicating about your intentions in a way that everyone that you're communicating to understands. And not only your method of communication, but who you're communicating to. So that if a patient's going to be transferred from, you know, one area of the institution to another, that there's appropriate handoffs, and that you give the new care providers all the information that they're going to need to properly take care of the patient. So we look at things like standardizing communication patterns, standardizing handoff communications, standardizing checklists and check sheets, standardizing, like I said, the bundles that we talked about. You standardize the way that things are done, and the more you standardize, the more people do them right. And if you've got evidence-based practice behind your standardization, then your care should improve. We have to give people the ability and enable them to clarify, question, and resolve any inconsistencies. So we have to break down any barriers that there might be, for example, between physicians and nurses, or nurses and medical assistants, or radiology and the care team on the floor, or the care team on the patient floor and the care team in the intensive care unit. So different areas and different professions, we have to break down any barriers and make sure that everyone is open to someone else, you know, questioning them, clarifying what they mean, that people are enabled to do that, and the people that they are questioning or clarifying, that they are open to that and are willing to address questions and, you know, resolve any inconsistencies. We have to enable people and not just encourage them, but require them to escalate to resolution any issues that they still don't. So let's say the pharmacy calls the doctor and the doctor says, no, I still want this dose of medication. The pharmacist that called in question has to be enabled to escalate that to maybe their chief pharmacist, and the chief pharmacist says, I don't understand this. And so they may need to escalate to whoever the supervisor is over the physician, the medical director over that physician who ordered the medication. So again, those things have to be done very timely before an error reaches the patient. But if the pharmacy is going to like really question and make sure that they are doing the best care for that patient, they're going to have to very quickly escalate to resolution any questions or concerns. The same way as if the pharmacy goes ahead and maybe they don't escalate all the way up, it gets to the nurse that's going to administer the medication. Well, generally that nurse, if they question it, would call the provider that ordered the medication. If they said, no, this is what they want, the nurse may go ahead and give it, or the nurse could call the pharmacy and they could have said, we talked to the provider. So there's still ways that errors can reach patients, even if people escalate appropriately. But if something is so outside the norm and so outside the standard, then everyone in the institution should be enabled to escalate to resolution until you actually get an answer and your concerns are addressed properly. And then finally, for an organization to really be an effective patient safety organization, there should be a preoccupation with failure. And every time you go in for your work in the hospital or healthcare setting, you have to go in thinking things could go wrong. And if things could go wrong, someone could be harmed or injured or die. So you have to have a preoccupation with things can fail. And I need to double check. I need to have people check me. I need to have a preoccupation with failure. I don't need to look at this IV pump that the shift before me set up. I need to look at that IV pump thinking maybe they didn't do it right, or maybe the system have malfunctioned, or the pump has malfunctioned. So I need to look at it and make sure that I'm in agreement with how this pump is set up. And if there's anything that's inconsistent, then I need to escalate that to resolution, whether I reset the pump and have someone check it or whatever I do. So that preoccupation with failure is key to patient safety effectiveness in an organization. So this is the documentary. And again, we will give you information on how to access this. but I think it's important to give you a good understanding of patient safety in healthcare settings to watch this documentary. And again, it's by the experts, which is far more than I could give you on this particular topic. I do want you, as you watch that documentary and then go through the readings for this week, to have these questions in the back of your mind, these objectives to come out on the other side with after the readings and the documentary. But what is the quality and patient safety movement? When did it start? Why did it start? And how have hospitals and healthcare organizations responded to the need for enhanced patient safety in their facility? How does incident reporting, electronic medical records, data use, data aggregation, how does that impact quality and patient safety? And there's some specific references to that in the documentary. So look to try to answer that question. What is the role of the patient, the consumer, for quality and patient safety? So how does patient safety somewhat rely on the patient to bring up and to question what's being done for them, or to say when somebody walks in the door, whoa, wait a minute, you didn't, there's sinks right over there. Please wash your hands before you touch my baby, or wash your hands before you touch my incision. Patients need to be enabled and encouraged to speak up if they think that something is not being done appropriately. And then finally, what role does the legal system play in quality and patient safety? Look at things like transparency and I'm sorry laws. There is a big push, and I'm an advocate of this push for transparency in telling someone when there has been a problem and error. But I'm also an advocate that that has to be done correctly. So I always tell people, don't go in there and fall on the sword, because it may be the wrong sword. I mean, we'll work with doctors and nurses that want to go into a patient and say, oh my goodness, this happened, this was an error, it's all my fault, I take full responsibility, here's what I did. And that may not be the case. So you can go into the patient and say, we've had a medication, or the family, and say, we've had a medication error, this has occurred, you got 10 times too much. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to monitor this. We're going to give you this other drug to counteract the medication we gave you. We're going to look for side effects. Here's what you need to look for. Here's what you need to tell us about. We're going to watch you really closely, et cetera, et cetera. And we're also going to look at our systems. We're going to look to see, whether my order was correct, what role that may have played in it. And we're going to look to see what we could have done better so that we can prevent this from occurring in the future. Now, if all of it's done under privilege, you may also need to tell the patient, I may not to be able to tell you the conclusions of our review, but I will come back in and let you know, what issues, or at least let you know we've identified issues that we're going to improve in the future. And it depends on estates laws and what the policy is in an individual institution as to what you tell the patient, but you're very transparent about the error. And I always say, hey, facts are facts. You should be very open and upfront about what the facts are. Those should be documented in the record, and that information should be available and provided to, the patient. So look at your ideas about transparency and I'm sorry laws. And some states will have I'm sorry laws that you can go in and say, I'm sorry that this occurred. And that can't be used as an admission against you in court. But if you go in and say, I'm sorry this occurred, and here's what happened, it was my fault. I wrote an incorrect order, and then I reassured the pharmacy that that's the order that I intended. So this really is on me. Then that can be used as an admission against you. So you have to know the state's laws and how you, if you're a healthcare lawyer, how you advise your clients, or if you're, in operations in a healthcare institution, how, you look to your legal system to say, how do we go in and do this so that we're, one, being transparent with the patient, but two, not jeopardizing the defense of the doctor or the nurse or whoever created it. So again, facts are facts, and facts will always, at least should be shared transparently, but the review of, who all is at fault and how are they at fault may or may not be, depending on the privilege laws and so forth. And then look at the shift from individual accountability to system responsibility. And how do we balance that and make sure that we continue to hold individuals accountable for their care, but at the same time look to the system as a safeguard? And from a liability standpoint, sometimes that's difficult to do because in medical malpractice cases, oftentimes the quote blame, if you will, or the blame that's put on by, or that the plaintiffs are trying to prove, they may try to shift that because typically it's going to follow, and I probably shouldn't say typically, you can tell I'm a defense lawyer, but it often follows the insurance or the dollars. And so if the hospital has a huge amount of insurance and an individual physician has, a $200,000 policy, then the plaintiffs are going to try to shift and say, this is a system problem and a system issue, not this individual provider. So you have to look at those issues whenever you're looking at who do we hold accountable individually? How do we hold a system accountable as being the safeguard to that individual accountability? Is it equal? Is it a backup? How do we do that? And all kinds of theories on how to do that, but something for you guys to think about and to, start building, what is your theories and what would be your advice and your recommendations on how to deal with these issues. So I look forward to having some conversations after you all watch the documentary on To Err is Human. And thank you so much. And I think this is probably going to be my last actual recorded lecture. So let me just say that I hope that you have gotten information out of this course that makes you think, that has given you some information on how to build on these issues and on healthcare quality and risk and liability issues that face hospitals and institutions. So thank you for your time and for your interest in this particular field of study.